The Edmonton Oilers have a new general manager, and I wish it wasn't Stan Bowman.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Now that the playoffs are over, the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, today's episode is going to be a Stan Bowman deep dive. Stan Bowman was hired as general manager of the Edmonton Oilers on Wednesday morning. We are going to approach this conversation with sensitivity and respect. The second segment of today's episode is definitely going to be on the sensitive side and something that if you're uncomfortable with discussions about that type of content, what happened in Chicago in 2010, we will timestamp it out for you. I'll let you know when the third segment's going to start. But the first segment, we are going to talk about this strictly from a hockey perspective. We are going to look at Stan Bowman's decisions in Chicago in maintaining and then disassembling a Stanley Cup championship team. We are going to talk about his short-sightedness and his decisions to try and maintain a window of competitiveness, even though that wasn't necessarily the best course of action. The second segment, we are going to talk about the moral quandary that the Oilers have put themselves in. And then the third segment, we're going to talk about this from an Oilers perspective in terms of public relations, using political capital on somebody from outside of the organization, and why the Oilers continue to take chances on people who have off-the-ice baggage with them. So at the outset, I know there are going to be people who aren't going to engage with this content honestly and genuinely. There are going to be people who immediately say, oh, you don't like him because of, well, yes, I do dislike him because of the off-the-ice stuff. We can talk about this purely from a hockey perspective, and that alone should give you pause. So if you're a bit more reactionary and you're more inclined to say Stan Bowman deserves another chance, let's look at his record. 2021, he's general manager from July of 2009 to October of 2021. He resigns in October of 2021 when this story comes out, and it puts a lot of pressure on the organization to try and do right. And to some degree, the Blackhawks have done a little bit better since Bowman's left. They got Kyle Davidson in as his replacement, but from a hockey perspective, Bowman takes over in 2009. The identifiable core of that Blackhawks team, and when you take a step, you think about the window that Stan Bowman had in Chicago. You take a big step back and you think about it. He is handed a team that already has Taves, that already has Kane, that has Duncan Keith, that has Dustin Byfuglien, that has Corey Crawford. That's already a pretty established group. A team that is reasonably competitive and needs a little nudging along. This was not a large-scale operation. This was not a case of a team getting built up gradually over an extended period of time. In 2009-10, they lost in 2008-2009, they lost in the conference finals, and that team was pretty good. That team had 46 wins in the regular season. Marty Havlat, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Sharp, Duncan Keith, Byfuglien, Brent Seabrook. That's a pretty good team already. And then Bowman takes over. They win the Stanley Cup the next year. That's the summer where the incident happens. It happens at the end of May, early June of 2010. The Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup. They go on to win the Stanley Cup in the shortened season 2011-12 as well. 2013. And then again in 2015. But the reason this move should give you pause, regardless of how you feel about whether or not Stan Bowman deserves a second chance, is the management of the team as it won. Obviously, you can't maintain a Stanley Cup contender indefinitely. Young, cheap players become expensive. Middle six players become expensive, and you have to start prioritizing. They give Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews the matching 10-year contracts. They give Brent Seabrook a long-term contract. Duncan Keith, of course, got like a 13-year contract, which he retired midway through. They make some big swings. They take some trades to try and prolong their window. And that's the thing here. That should give you pause as an Oilers fan. The Oilers are a lot further along in the life cycle of their core than the Blackhawks were when Stan Bowman took over. I watched the press conference. There was a question about that, where taking over the Oilers versus taking over the Blackhawks. And think about it. Kane and Toews very early on, Duncan Keith very early on, Brent Seabrook very early on in their respective careers. We're already at year 9 of McDavid. Draisaitl's on year 11. These guys have significant NHL track records. They are in their mid-20s already. They have some bad contracts on the books that they're going to have to be creative. And it's ironic that the Oilers have hired Stan Bowman, because he is in part the reason Darnell Nurse has the extreme contract he does. Stan Bowman refusing to accept the Blackhawks were no longer a contender is why he traded 2 first-round picks in Adam Boquist, who was a top 10 pick, for Seth Jones, and then immediately made Seth Jones one of the highest-paid players in the entire sport. That trickle-down effect is part of the reason Darnell Nurse is extremely overpaid and has one of the worst contracts in the entire league. I'll go through some of the other greatest hits. Trading Brandon Saad for Nikita Zadorov, trading Gus Forsling for Calvin DeHaan and Anthony Sorella, trading Ryan Hartman for a first-round pick, trading Brandon Saad for Artemi Panarin. Trading Artemi Panarin for Brandon Saad. Trading 2 draft picks for trading Teuvo Teravainen for 2 draft picks and a salary dump. Giving Brent Seabrook $7 million a year in 2015. Trading for and extending Seth Jones. And then, the players he wasn't able to find ways to keep long-term, whether it's Ryan Hartman or Teuvo Teravainen or Brandon Saad or Artemi Panarin or Alex DeBrincat. You can make a very long list of these decisions were made short-sighted, that as long as we have Kane and Toews, we need to be Stanley Cup contenders. And whatever it takes, we can burn the assets. Well, we can't keep these young guys because we need to bring in veterans to fill out our roster so we can be competitive. And that lack of accountability, that lack of foresight is why the Blackhawks are in year 4 of a multi-year teardown, why the Blackhawks walked away from Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane, why they traded DeBrincat, why they traded Kirby Dach, why ultimately they were in a position to draft Connor Bedard. But when you look at this from a hockey perspective, Bowman inherited a team with 3 future Hall of Famers, arguably 4. That team, really good for a short window, has one of the most accomplished coaches of all time at the helm in Joel Quenneville, who also is probably going to get another opportunity at some point based on the fact that if Stan Bowman can, Quenneville will as well. So from a hockey perspective alone, this should give you pause. You look at some of the bad trades that Stan Bowman made, contracts, the players he prioritized keeping over others, and very quickly you should realize while the Oilers core is great, it can be unwound very, very quickly. That'll do it for our first segment here on Locked On Oilers. Be sure to stick around. When we come back from break, we are going to be talking about the sensitive topic. We are going to be talking about sexual misconduct, which is a sensitive topic. So if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, you can skip ahead. I will be sure to timestamp out and say, hey, we're coming back at this time, and I will stamp that at the beginning of the episode so you can skip ahead. Be right back. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But in the dead of summer, with the basketball and hockey playoffs over, all we've got, the WNBA, Major League Baseball, the Olympics, and the sports are not sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going all summer long whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. If you were curious, the Oilers are the betting favorite to take home the Stanley Cup next year at plus 850. The Florida Panthers, if you think they're going to go back-to-back, plus 950. If you're like me and you think the Stars are finally going to make it happen, you can get the Stars at 10-1. You get the Devils at 11-1, the Avalanche at 11-1, the Hurricanes at 14-1, the Rangers at 14-1, the Leafs at 15-1. You want a long shot? You get the Vancouver Canucks 26-1 to win the Stanley Cup right now. So head on over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner, Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. What we're about to talk about is uncomfortable and disconcerting, but even though it is uncomfortable, it is important that we talk about it, because when we let that discomfort rule us, govern how we act and how we handle things, it allows bad things to happen. It allows sexual misconduct, sexual assault to happen. It's ultimately part of why the Blackhawks were in the situation they were in, and why we're having this conversation about Stan Bowman, why he's not just another, oh yeah, he won cups a couple years ago, he had to go back onto the GM career rehab path, be an assistant somewhere, be a scout somewhere, and then get another crack at it. We are only talking about this because of inaction. So I'm going to read to you directly from the Jenner and Block report. You can look this up yourself. All you have to do is Google Jenner and Block Blackhawks. Later on May 23rd, within an hour after the Blackhawks won the playoff game that secured their place in the Stanley Cup Finals, 5 members of senior management, then President John McDonough, Al McIsaac, General Manager Stan Bowman, Executive Vice President Jay Blunk, and Assistant General Manager Kevin Cheveldayoff, along with then head coach Joel Quenneville and skills coach Jim Gary, met to discuss what had been learned about Aldrich and John Doe. John Doe in this is Kyle Beach. Accounts of the meeting vary significantly, and the participants had limited recollections of the details of the meeting. All participants recall being informed that there was an incident between Aldrich and Kyle Beach involving an unwelcome sexual advance, but for the most part, the participants reported that they only learned about the incident at a high level. That Aldrich, a coach, tried to get under the sheets with John Doe, a player. Gary recalled telling everyone in the meeting what he said John Doe told him. Aldrich was pressuring him to have sex with him, and that Aldrich told John Doe that if John Doe did not submit to Aldrich's advances, he could harm John Doe's career. None of the participants of the meeting recall being told about the type of clearly non-consensual sexual conduct that is described by us by John Doe in this lawsuit, or was described by during John Doe's interview with us. Bowman recalled later in that meeting, McDonough and Quenneville made comments about the challenge of getting to the Stanley Cup Finals and the desire to focus on the team and the playoffs. Several years later, McIsaac, in discussing the situation between Aldrich and John Doe with another employee, stated that McDonough did not want any negative publicity during the Stanley Cup Final. While there was a general failure to recall how the meeting ended, Bowman recalled a statement by McDonough, the most senior member of management in the room, that he would handle the situation. Regardless of who was or was perceived to be responsible for handling the situation, Aldrich continued to travel and work with the team and participate in team activities throughout the playoffs. We found no evidence that any action was taken to address the issue until after the playoffs had ended. That fundamental failure to take any action on Bowman's part is wrong. Fundamentally wrong. And I tweeted this on Wednesday morning, and I'll reiterate it now. It is not dissimilar from what Joe Paterno did at Penn State. You can dispute what Joe Paterno knew when he may have knew it, but he knew something inappropriate was happening with Jerry Sandusky and young boys. Very clearly, the Blackhawks knew there was a situation with sexual misconduct involved, and they did nothing because they didn't want to put the team and the organization in an uncomfortable situation. That failure to act ultimately got Joe Paterno fired. Joe Paterno told the people above him in the food chain. He told two people at the university what he was told by Michael McQueary, who witnessed something that Jerry Sandusky had done. That alone, that failure to take action of any kind is a catastrophic failure of leadership. We exist in this hockey space where it's accountability and leadership and leader of men and ideals. And the minute somebody could have taken a leadership role and took some accountability and made sure, even if Stan Bowman himself did not want to get directly involved in the situation, he could have circled back around and asked John McDonough, hey, did you follow up on that? Or what did you do about that? Instead, everybody sat on their hands. The Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup. In Brad Aldrich's performance review, he got a sterling, did a great job preparing coaches, does great job managing multiple tasks simultaneously. Congrats on winning the Stanley Cup. Then, when the Blackhawks were promptly 3 weeks later ready to start their formal investigation, they gave Aldrich a choice. Would you rather resign or submit to be investigated? He resigned, got a job, first with a college in Ohio, and then a high school in Michigan, where he later sexually abused a minor and went to prison. The Blackhawks' culpability in this situation is being played out in civil court still. There is another person who is alleged that Brad Aldrich put them in a similar position, and the Blackhawks did nothing about it. So I'll leave you with that as far as the moral quandary of this situation. Coming up next on Locked On Oilers, we are going to tackle what this means for the Oilers and why the Oilers, for some reason, just can't get out of their own way sometimes. Thank you to everybody who is listening to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. This Wednesday show is not the original one I had planned. I had an entire played out thing about trying to distill out Leon Draisaitl's value separate from McDavid, separate from Cody Ceci, and trying to make the case that he is a top 5 player in the world. But you'll be getting that on Thursday instead because of breaking news. That's the thing with breaking news, man. It can always throw a monkey wrench in your plans. So I struggle to understand this from a hockey perspective. The Oilers just did a version of this with Ken Holland, who had considerable success as the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings. Stanley Cups, multiple Hall of Famers. They, being the Oilers, went for the first guy with the Stanley Cup they could get their hands on. And this is an issue. This is a fundamental issue. And this isn't just an Oilers problem. There is a credibility issue in the National Hockey League. So many organizations look at guys' resumes and only see the resumes. They don't understand how they got those positions. And this is something I'll wrap up on, but Stan Bowman was born on third base 2 separate times. He's the son of the most successful NHL coach of all time, Scotty Bowman. And then he got to inherit a team that had 4 future Hall of Famers on it. That's what rubs me so wrong about this entire situation. Not only did Stan Bowman do something wrong and his punishment was not being able to be in the NHL for 2 years, he gets to go on third base again and run a team with Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. He thinks he's entitled to be in the National Hockey League. And that's what rubs me so wrong about this situation. He thinks he's entitled to be in this league, that this is not hard work. And you can say, oh, he did workshops, he did seminars, he talked to Kyle Beach, he talked to Sheldon Kennedy. All of that stuff is great. This feels wholly transactional. The Oilers are selling some of their hard-earned credibility. Lest we forget why the Oilers have gone so long without long-term success. Because they've been chasing ghosts. Whether it was Kevin Lowe, whether it was Craig McTavish, whether it was Keith Gretzky, whether it was trying to organize this team in a way reminiscent of the 80s dynasty around McDavid and Draisaitl as their Gretzky and Messier. until the Oilers recognize that we are in 2024, the longer you chase ghosts, the longer you are wasting your time. And yes, the Oilers came one goal away from winning the Stanley Cup this year. Nobody is disputing that. The issue and the reason I feel so gross about this entire situation is the Oilers have spent so long trying to be taken seriously. And for the first time, they did it on the ice. They went out unassailable. Great playoff run, all-time high, at least in my lifetime, of public approval. They have a great offseason. They get the interim coach they like full-time. They get Jeff Skinner. They get Victor Arvidsson. Slam dunk decisions. They turn Ryan McLeod into Matthew Savoie. They do everything you would want from a general manager's perspective with Jeff Jackson at the helm. Everybody's feeling pretty good. They got to take care of Draisaitl. They got to take care of Bouchard. McDavid's looming. But you feel in a really good place. And then immediately, well, what do we need to get over the finish line? Well, somebody with who has a history of covering up or failing to take action when it comes to sexual misconduct. And the Oilers continue to allow themselves to eat it. And that's the thing. It's one thing when you make one questionable decision, but you bring in an Evander Kane, you bring in Corey Perry, lest we forget that they tried to bring in Jake Virtanen on a PTO, and now you bring in Stan Bowman. That tells me you don't take those issues seriously, that you are more concerned with hockey than what you represent as a social institution. And this is something I've written about a lot over the years. I wrote about this back in 2021 when the civil lawsuit that Kyle Beach had filed against the Blackhawks first came out. It is disheartening to think that hockey, something I love so much, that means so much to me, that has opened so many doors in my life, both professionally and socially, in terms of friendships and connections I've been able to make, hurts people. There are people who will see the Stan Bowman news and be reminded of the worst thing that can happen to you as a person. That there are people out there who are survivors of sexual assault, and they are going to think, well, my hockey team doesn't care about me. My hockey team doesn't care. If they did, they wouldn't have done this. And that's what's so callous about all of this, is there are survivors of sexual misconduct in the workplace, in that organization. There might be players on that team who are victims of sexual misconduct somewhere in their lives. And now they're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it. And we should ask more. And there are a lot of people out there who are going to argue in bad faith. And if you are somebody who is as uncomfortable with this as I am, the people who are arguing in bad faith about, oh, well, they deserve second chances. He did his time. Doesn't he deserve a second chance? Well, if Sheldon Kennedy and Kyle Beach signed off on it, all of that may apply to Stan Bowman. But you brought in Corey Perry, who got really inebriated at a corporate event and then harassed a Blackhawks employee. That's why he was bought out. Whatever you think of the Evander Kane situation, you know something improper happened between him and his ex-wife. Whatever you think about what happened between Jake Virtanen and his significant other at that time, something inappropriate happened. And that's what's frustrating about this. It's the Oilers have been so callous in their pursuit of their first Stanley Cup since 1990 that you are aligning yourself with people with questionable backgrounds. And there are people who will suck it up and say, oh, well, if they win the Stanley Cup, I won't care. That very well might be okay for some people, but hockey is supposed to be a communal experience. It is supposed to be a shared, loved experience. And when you are writing off a portion of your fan base and telling them that they don't matter by associating and bringing in people who have these histories, it's a slap in the face and it's wholly uncomfortable. I struggle to find the justification for this. And we talked about it, even from a hockey perspective. Stan Bowman doesn't have a great track record. He inherited a team with 4 future Hall of Famers, and that's great. he fundamentally disrupted that organization to the point that they are in year 3 of a multi-year teardown, and a good season for them would be 70 points. I don't know, man. I don't understand how you can look at this situation and just think this is a good idea. That'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Before we get out of here, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows in every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.